Welcome to Oz Trader Chat. Today is the 14th of June 2012, and as always we need to first of all run through our disclaimers. The first disclaimer informs us about risk and reminds us that all trading involves risk. Please be aware of and accept this risk before trading, and never trade with money that you cannot afford to lose. You should also be aware that past performance of any trading methodology is no guarantee of future results, and no representation is being made in this webinar that any account will achieve profits or losses similar to those discussed. Also be aware that all results should be considered to be hypothetical unless otherwise specified, and hypothetical performance results have many inherent limitations and, unlike an actual performance record, do not represent actual trading. A few points about using NetViewer. If you are new to Trader Chat, the best way to ask questions is to type a message into the chat window, of course. If you cannot hear me, slide your VoIP speaker slider up to the right. And if you'd like to speak to me, right-click and also enter a chat message, please, so that I know that the right-click was intentional, because many mouse clicks are, of course, unintentional. Be careful of unintentional mouse clicks because they pop up brightly colored arrows and speech bubbles with your name attached. So, that's the introduction. I've got the disclaimers and the introduction down to a fine art. I'm sure you'll all agree. So let's start speaking about the markets. In particular, of course, today we're going to take a look at the Australian market, and we're going to see what might be happening in Australia. Now, in Australia, I've only myself just discovered Australians were celebrating, I'm sure in grand style, the Queen's birthday on Monday. So the financial markets were closed on Monday, and last Thursday in Oz Trader Chat, of course, we were looking at potentially entering the market on the basis that maybe, possibly, a trough of the 40-week cycle might have formed on the Monday, the 4th of June, or potentially the Tuesday, the 5th of June, because of the fact that those two prices were pretty much equal. And I suggested sort of various strategies. I wasn't aware that Monday was a public holiday in Australia, and so before we sort of get into talking about the analysis and what's going on, sort of a real little bit of advice. If you have a public holiday coming up, particularly something as extraordinary as the celebration of the Queen's birthday, I would recommend being cautious about entering the market on the Friday, because you are vulnerable, particularly in a country that's not the United States, even in the United States, but particularly for countries that aren't the United States. You're vulnerable to what might happen around the world on the Monday, the day that you're all taking a holiday and toasting the Queen. You need to be very careful. So just as sort of a little word of advice, some of you might not agree with that, but certainly whenever in South Africa there was a public holiday on the Monday, and we used to have some fairly extraordinary public holidays in South Africa, but I won't digress to a discussion of public holidays. But when there's a public holiday coming up, I would certainly be very careful about entering a trade on the Friday, particularly a trade which is based on the identification of a very major or a very long-term cycle. What do I mean by a very long-term cycle? Because, of course, if you're trading intraday, a long-term cycle might be the one-day cycle. What I mean by a very long-term cycle is if it's a cycle that is sort of 4 degrees longer than your trading cycle, which is the cycle that we're talking about at the moment. The cycle we're trying to identify in the market at the moment is the 40-week cycle. And that's 4 degrees longer than our hypothetical trading cycle. I've been talking about trading the 40-day cycle. And so, of course, the 40-week cycle is 4 degrees longer. It's 4 steps up. Well, it's 3 steps up. So, including your trading cycle, it's 4 up. And I would be careful about entering trades for a much longer cycle. trough, on a much longer cycle trough, or of course peak round about public holidays. But let's get back to discussing things. I've got a few. If you have any questions, of course, at any time, please put them into the chat window. I've been taking a look at the Australian market this morning, and I thought we'd really just sort of continue shooting the breeze around the markets and what's happening in the markets, and discussing the Australian market. Continue our discussion from last week. Several interesting things came up last week, I think, and I'd like to sort of just keep talking around some of those issues, which of course have to do with trading according to Hurst cyclic principles and performing analyses according to Hurst cyclic principles. Now, last week, if at any point you have anything that you'd like to say, please, of course, pop it into the chat window. Last week, I quite a lot of time discussing the possibility that a 40-week cycle had occurred on the 4th of June. And when I'm running to these net view, sometimes switches my windows, which is a bit confusing. Okay, there we go. This was the analysis that we spent some time discussing last week. And last week I emphasize something that I believe is very important when you're analyzing market using Hurst cyclic principles, which is that you should never really get fixated, I don't believe, on one analysis or one chart in any particular market. I believe it's important, and I'm talking end of day here. Intraday trading is subtly different, and let me just sort of throw this into the pot right at this stage. I believe that with intraday trading, you should, of course, be watching several scenarios playing out on the end of day level. But when you're performing intraday trading, you choose one of them and you trade that on an intraday basis. Let's just sort of set that straight right at the beginning. But on an end of day level, I believe it's important to watch several different analyses. And the reason for that is because it's very easy to become seduced by what you think is happening. Particularly in the new version of Sentient Trader. You all know, of course, that we're releasing a new version of Sentient Trader before the end of June. In fact, things are looking very good that it's going to be available next week, and so I'm very excited about that. And in the new version of Sentient Trader, you're able to influence the analysis that Sentient Trader is performing to a much greater degree, and you can really fine-tune all of your analyses, and you can watch several analyses that are influenced particularly by your own personal opinion, which is, I think, very exciting. So, it is important that you don't get too fixated onto one single analysis, and we discussed that a little bit last week, so I'm not going to bang on about it. But last week we were discussing in particular the potential that the 40-week cycle had troughed on Monday the 4th of June. Okay, which was last week Monday, 10 days ago. And we discussed the fact that there was the potential that had happened. And here is this analysis, which I believe I was showing you last week. In this particular workspace, just as a matter of interest, you'll see I've got 4 charts. Okay, and the way that I like to manage my workspace, obviously you can manage your own workspace in any way you like. The way I like to manage it is that I have a workspace dedicated on an end of day basis. I have a workspace, if it's an end of day workspace, I have it dedicated to one instrument, and I will start off with one chart, and then I will bring up another chart, and I will call the charts, I will give them names according to how I feel about the analysis. Okay, just as a matter of interest, this is how I work. I go to Tools, Trading Settings, and under the chart name, you can see I name the analysis according to how I feel about the analysis. So you can see this chart is called possible because I think this is a possible analysis, basically. And Let's go back to it. There we go. I think this is a possible analysis. I don't think it's a very likely analysis, to be honest. But as we discussed last week, it is a possible analysis. And when you're trading the market, you need to bear in mind the possible things that might be occurring. And as we discussed last week, there is certainly a very high potential that the 40-week cycle trough that we're all expecting and talking about and everybody's wondering about, there is a high chance that 40-week cycle trough is going to come in early. Okay, in other words, not in July or even sort of early August as we were expecting way back in February and March. We were talking about it happening in July. Now it seems possible that it might have happened still last week. Nothing has occurred yet which completely denies the possibility of it having occurred, although price action is not looking very healthy. I must admit, so I think the chances of it having occurred are probably slimmer than they were last week, but it's not impossible. Okay, so this is the analysis that we were looking at last week, and as you can see, according to this analysis, Sentient Trader has actually positioned that 40-week cycle trough already on last Monday. Okay, now let me just, I'm trying to turn on my whiteboard, and I've got to go through a peculiar set of instructions to do that. Okay, so here you can see Sentient Trader has positioned that 40-week cycle trough there already. Why is that? Is that because I have influenced the analysis and got it to position it there? No, it isn't actually. All that I have done is I have allowed Sentient Trader to consider the trough in August. As you can see, in early August, I've allowed it to consider the trough in August a trough of the 18-month cycle. If that trough in August was genuinely a trough of the 18-month cycle, then in fact, according to various of Hurst's principles, of course, the 40-week cycle trough almost certainly did occur on Monday, the 4th of July. And as you can see, that cycle ended up being 44.3 weeks, so it was actually quite a long 40-week cycle. Okay. It's important whenever you look at an analysis, I think, to understand what it is that forms the foundation of this analysis, and what is it that makes this analysis different from any other analysis. What it is that makes this analysis different is this big arrow that I've drawn here pointing to the 18-month cycle trough in early August of last year. As you know, and we've discussed this at length in previous Australia chats, I don't actually believe that was a trough of the 18-month cycle personally. Because I believe there was fundamental interaction that caused price to drop down on those 2 days, and that in fact the 18-month trough is much better positioned on the 4th of October, where it occurred, I pretty much believe, around the world. So this analysis, which has already positioned that trough of the 40-week cycle on the 4th of October, on the 4th of June, I beg your pardon, is a possible analysis in my mind. It's based on a rather shaky foundation. The foundation of this analysis is, as I've just mentioned,